Hi everyone, welcome back to Pine Hollow Auto Diagnostics. This 2006 Ford Escape V6 is kind of getting on my nerves. It's having constant charging system problems. Let me tell you the backstory on this one, and we'll see if we can make it right for the customer. They're my neighbors, so it's not a long distance customer, but I feel like there's no good solution to this problem. So if you remember, about 2 years ago, did a video on this exact car that was charging to 20 to 30 volts. I mean, it would just, the cluster would go dead, it would set high voltage codes, and that ended up being a bad alternator. Now, the actual piece that went bad in the alternator was the smart regulator. So at that point, we tried installing a reman alternator, and it was, if you remember, made that really bad noise because the fan was hitting the inside of the casing. But I grabbed the voltage regulator out of that reman alternator, put it in the alternator that was already on the truck here, and that worked out, and it was good for 2 years. Then, exact same thing happened. Overcharging. A month ago, that's when that failed. So I went to Rock Auto. I'm like, well, let's try a different brand reman alternator. BBB Industries. Ordered it up, installed it. It worked for about 5 seconds. Boom, overcharging. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And this alternator is notoriously a pain in the ass to replace. You have to take the CV axle out. It's buried, under the engine there against the firewall. So not only are these alternators failure prone, they are a major pain to swap out. So then the vehicle's here for a couple weeks. I'm like, I want to get a known good quality regulator, OEM, hopefully, but I couldn't find one. Ford obviously discontinues parts after 7 years. This thing is, what, 2006, so 18 years old. I finally located a reputable company that makes these voltage regulators, Regitar USA. I had to get it through a specialty shop in upstate New York. They sent me one. I got the regulator and I popped it in again to the original alternator. Now, original, it was it says Remy reman on it, so even before I ever saw this Ford Escape, it was already replaced at some point. But anyways, put in the Regitar regulator, and the one that I took out, guess what? Also said Regitar on it, and that one lasted 2 years. That was the one that we took out of the reman benchmark alternator. So I'm like, well, we'll see if it lasts another 2 years. Well, it's been a month, and the customer says the battery light was coming on for a few days intermittently, and he tried driving it here at night, and he made it about a mile to go, stalled out on the road, and had to get it towed the rest of the way. Luckily they have enough vehicles, so his wife towed him with their pickup truck, and here we are. So let's do a diagnosis on this. I ordered another reman alternator on Rock Auto, Remy, the same one, same brand that's in it right now. I don't have the part yet, but before swapping the alternator out for like the 4th time, I want to be 100% that we do indeed have a problem, that it's reproducible, that it is indeed this regulator failing again. So let's do that. So when the car got towed here, obviously the battery was completely spanked. It was like 11 volts, no crank. So I took the battery out and charged it in my garage overnight, fully charged. Put it back in the truck. Fired it up and took it for a test drive. Absolutely no issues. We're charging at 14.5 volts. Everything's beautiful. So in cases like this, you would think, you know, the problem would be pretty easily reproducible if the vehicle was dead on arrival and now it's perfectly fine after, you know, manually charging the battery. I took it on another test drive, this time around the block, like a longer 10-mile, you know, varied driving conditions. And I noticed this thing under load, low RPM, you know, when you're kind of lugging the engine, it's an overdrive, whatever, torque converter's locked up, going up a little grade. It started bucking. Like classic misfire under load scenario. I had the radio on, the radio kind of not shut off, but you lost the sound for a little bit, then it would come on. Every time it would buck. So the charging seemed to be okay, but then after a few of these bucking cycles, I noticed the battery light did come on. So I got the scanner out and looked at the data pits for this alternator. And I found something very, very interesting. So I took a screenshot of when the battery light came on. You see it happened right around here. The voltage was, you know, close to 15, about 14 volts, and it kind of dropped, came back up, and then just started declining to 12.4. This is when the alternator actually stopped charging. And you can see that by the generator monitor data pit. This is coming from the alternator to the PCM, basically saying how hard the alternator is working, the field duty cycle. Boom, it drops to 0, and then after a while, the PCM actually says, hey, let's turn on the battery warning light. You see that happens later, once the voltage went below, you know, 13 volts or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's kind of strange. Shut the vehicle off, restarted it, alternator came back online, no problems at all. Is it possible that there's a voltage spike that's happening when, you know, this misfire happens, that's actually affecting the regulator inside the alternator, that makes it freak out, and then it stops charging? And if you keep driving, you know, your battery will die. It won't just turn on its own, but after an ignition cycle, it comes back to life. It doesn't seem like the regulator is failing just all on its own. It seems like it's caused by this ignition voltage spike, probably in the whole system. Now, so what I want to do before replacing the alternator again is actually diagnose this misfire problem, which the owner never told me about, never said it was bucking or jerking or anything, but it seems very related. Like if you're just cruising down the road and it's running smoothly, no battery lights, 14.5 volts, just perfect. And then after a few of these events where, you know, misfire is hard, you know, not every time, but the alternator does seem to shut off right then and doesn't come back to life. So what's the strategy for diagnosing this very intermittent misfire? On Fords, it can be a little tricky. So obviously check engine light is not on for a misfire code because it happens very intermittently. Just a few misfires under, you know, this very specific condition. So we could try to go into OBD2 mode, mode 6, and see if the computer stored any misfire counts. So here we are. I'm using the Autel because it gives the most information in OBD2. And if we go to, let's keep going here. Okay, misfire, monitor general data, total engine misfire and catalyst damage misfire rate. We see all zeros. Emissions threshold misfire rate. Cylinder 1 data. Cylinder 1 catalyst damage, emissions threshold misfire rate. They're all zeros, zeros again. So, not very helpful. The only way to do this is to hook up an oscilloscope and monitor the current going to these ignition coils. Now, let's say, you know, spark plugs are worn and we got a little carbon tracking or something, or the spark just can't make it through the spark plug, and it ends up either backfeeding to the primary circuit and spiking the PCM or the entire system. The radio's affected, you know, the alternator looks like it's affected. So what I want to do is put a current clamp on the voltage, you know, supply wire to these ignition coils to see the ramps, and then I want to sync it with one of the 6 cylinders, so we know, you know, is it just a single cylinder that's acting up? We'll go after that one. It probably needs a set of plugs. Hopefully it doesn't need any coils, but we have to prove that to see if a coil is starting to short out, and then, you know, go from there. We have to fix this misfire problem first before condemning the alternator again. So the previous times the alternator, you know, did fail. It shouldn't charge to 30 volts just when you turn the vehicle on. That's obviously an alternator failure. But in this case, after 1 month with this supposedly quality, you know, regulator, and after this test drive, we have to attack this misfire complaint. So let me set up the scope, look up some wiring diagrams, and see if we can pinpoint this issue. Alright, so here's the scope setup to monitor this ignition system. Easiest place to get all the coil wires, coil control wires, is at the engine computer. So these are 2-wire coils. You have the feed coming in, and then the computer controls all 6, ground side switched. So basically I have my amp clamp around all these 6 wires right at the PCM, so the current's going to be going towards the engine computer through the jaws this way. I want to set it to 1 volt is 10 amps. We'll re-zero the clamp, and then the sync is on coil number 1 control, which is the light green and white wire right here. So 2 channels, and on that control wire I'm actually using a 20-to-1 attenuator because I want to protect this scope. The scope right now is like almost $3,000, which is ridiculous. I think it used to be like $1,000, but don't want to take any chances, so we'll have to set up the scale to take this into account. You want to be safe, especially if there's a shorting coil or worn spark plugs and the thing is violently spiking the entire system. You want to protect your equipment. So let's hook up the laptop to the Pico and take this thing on a test drive and see if we can reproduce the fault. Alright, let's set up our oscilloscope. So channel 1 is going to be the sync, and right here, you know, the 1X probe is the default. We're using a, let's see, does it have the 20 attenuator? Is that the 20X? And then channel 2 we can bump down. 1 volt's going to be 10 amps, so plus or minus 2 volts. So the current ramps should be up to here. Let's fire it up and okay. Let's just put that on 1. Okay, so you can see the ignition voltage now, if you use the default scale, is at 11 or 1.1, so we need to do the 10x. There we go. Now we're at 12 volts. Perfect. We can even bump it up to 50. Let's fire it up. And shut it off just to make sure we're measuring the right thing. Here there are the coil ramps, multi-strike system, and there's our sync. Okay, and you want to see nice ramps without the line jumping straight up, indicating a shorted coil. And then when the current's released, we get the actual ignition spark occurring. Then it kind of ramps it up again, and the spark finishes right there. Okay, that makes sense. So everything looks good. Now we just need to test drive it and recreate this issue. Here we see the triple strike. So right now all the coils look fine. I'm suspecting a worn spark plug causing, causing this voltage spike. But I want to catch it on the scope, and then I want to see if the OBD2 data will pick this up, or if that voltage spike is confusing the computer and you can't even run the misfire monitor and everything just wigs out. We got to find the culprit here. Well, I thought while we're here, we have extra channels on the oscilloscope. Let's grab the alternator monitor wire. That's this gray and orange pin 16, and hopefully we'll make this thing act up, and we'll see if, is there a big current or a voltage spike, and then this monitor just completely drops out. Is there a cause and effect? And that way we can correlate that and see what's causing our issue. Alright, so we got our signals on the screen. Again, apologies for the glare. This is as bright as my screen gets. And anyways, we can see the signals. So there's the generator monitor signal, and it's a duty cycle 0 to 10 volts. Then there's our coil current ramps and our sync. So everything looks good at the moment. Let's take it on a drive while recording data. Try to get it to glitch, and I want that, once that monitor drops out to 0, we should see the battery light and this thing should stop charging. Well, can't get the alternator to act up yet. It's definitely misfiring under load, but the monitor signal is still good. Alright, so I just had an event where it was bucking, and then it's like the whole engine shut off for a second. We caught it on the scope. Check this out. There you go. There were no ignition spikes. This was under load for let's see how long did that event last. 1.8 or 200 milliseconds. Okay, so less than a second. But look what happened to our monitor on the generator. It dropped out. Completely dropped out. Ignition came back and monitor came back. So it looks like, did we see anything bad right before? A couple good spikes right there. Right during the ignition event. You can see there's another one right there. It's almost like the coil signal is backfeeding into that monitor circuit. Probably inside the engine computer. So I'm going to keep going here. Let me save this one. And we'll go up a grade and try to make this thing act up. Alright, finally got it. Going up the hill here. Look at that. Generator monitor is at 0, so let's pause that. Let's see what happened when this thing dropped out. Right there. Just boom, like a switch. Just completely dropped out. And it's off right now. Now my current clamp is misbehaving here, so don't pay too much attention to that. But we don't see anything obvious like something would have spiked the alternator to do this. Let me save that waveform. Well, without even cycling the ignition, battery lights out. GenMon is back in business. Dang. Oh, this is inconclusive. Just happened again, going up a little grade. Battery light's gonna come on soon, as long as the monitor stays at 0. And There it is. Like clockwork. So is that related to the misfire event or not? It seems like it is. Every single time it happens right after a hard shaking. Alright, let's try shutting the vehicle off. Boom, generator came right back instantly. I mean instantly. No questions. I'm wondering if the PCM is pulling that signal down, or is it the regulator inside the alternator? We're still not 100% if the alternator is bad, or if the misfire is causing the PCM to freak out and pull that signal down. Happened again. Going up a little grade. So we lost the Gen Mon signal, and I had that momentary half-second like complete ignition cutout during the misfire event. So it seems to be pretty repeatable. Alright, so we lost the Gen Mon again. I'm just going to pop it into neutral. Shut the vehicle off on the go. And restart it. Back in business. Okay, very repeatable. Alright, last check I want to do is unplug the alternator control connector and see what the default strategy is. What is this Gen Mon? Is it, you know, low? What's pulling it up? The alternator or the PCM? So let's roll the scope. It's at 0 right now. We'll turn the key on.
96.
We're at 10 volts, so the alternator's pulling that down. Okay, let's start it up. And what is the base voltage right now is 13.5 volts. That's being measured at the DLC. So that's pretty neat. Let's try pulling that wire down manually through a test light and see if this voltage drops out. Okay, confirmed. This is a low voltage sense circuit that I can just pull down with my test light. It does not light the test light. If I remove the test light, we're back to 10 volts on the scope. So what's pulling that down? Let's try running the car, pull that down with a test light, and see if the voltage goes down to, you know, less than 13.5 volts. Alright, here we go. Let's fire it up. Battery voltage is up. And I'm going to ground out this red wire and see what happens. Voltage is still 14.4. Remove the ground. It drops and then comes back. And again. Alternator does not drop out. Huh. .4 in the scanner. Not what I expected. So we're still changing these spark plugs out. Then we're taking out another test drive. And we'll see if the charging system is still faulty. Alright, so spark plug time. Took out number, whichever one this is, easy to get to. It is Motorcraft. I don't see any carbon tracking on the side. The gap looks pretty big. So I measured the gap with my calipers here, about 2.1 millimeters, and the spec is 1.3 to 1.4. So definitely excessive gap, almost by a whole millimeter. This thing needs spark plugs, first and foremost. Then once we get rid of that misfire, we'll take it on a spin, and right now I can recreate the problem like 4 times in 5 miles. So if the problem goes away with new spark plugs, then it does not need another alternator, which would be really nice. Alright, so the front spark plugs, piece of cake. The rear spark plugs, you gotta remove the upper intake plenum. You don't have to remove it all the way. Just kind of swing it to the side, disconnect a few hoses so you can reach the coils. So let's put those plugs in there as well and take this thing for a rip. Alright, moment of truth. 6 NGK iridium spark plugs installed. There's the part number. Let's take this thing for a rip. Just 2 channels on the scope. The ignition cylinder 1 trigger and that Gen Mon wire. Hopefully it won't drop out. Hopefully we won't feel any misfires at all. Alright, we're going up the grade. Misfire is definitely fixed. That's 100% confirmed. You know, under 2,000 RPM, about half throttle, it would be bucking and jerking all over the place on the same hill. No glitches on the alternator. So I'm going to keep driving it for a while, but I have a suspicion that it's all related. So that's it. I'm going to call this Ford Escape fixed. So customer complaint was not charging, and the repair was, hey, you need new spark plugs. Pfft, mind blown. Have you guys ever seen that before? I guess that's what you get with smart charging systems. If the computer goes nuts because of an ignition problem, it could affect the charging system, apparently. So it was perfect on the whole test drive, while before the spark plug replacement, we could consistently make it glitch, act up, and reproduce that charging fault on the inclines under load. So that's it. I'm confident giving this back to the customer, and appreciate everyone watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.